Hi friends, welcome to Coordinate, and today we want to understand on how we can work with conditional statements in PHP. So definitely let's just implement the actual syntax for PHP to denote the starting and ending of the actual scripts of PHP. So this is what we've done, and on the very first conditional statements that we work with first, we'll see how we can implement an if as a conditional statement. Let me just implement a comment. We'll see on how we can work with an if as a conditional statement, and then from there we'll also see on how we can work with an if else conditional statement, and lastly we'll see in this session, through not the last conditional statement, we will see on how we can work with an if else if and else conditional statement are simply the last conditional statement in this session, through not the least in PHP. Actually, even in our next session we'll introduce a switch statement as a conditional statement that we can work with in PHP. So of course, if else and if else if conditional statement are simply one set of conditional statements. They are in one line. Actually, an if conditional statement is the very first conditional statement that we will see. Then if else conditional statement is simply an extension of an if conditional statement, and the same actually applies to an if else if and else conditional statement is simply the extension of an if else conditional statement. Hence they are one and the same. Let's see on how we can work with an if as a conditional statement. So an if follows this syntax, which is simply an if as the actual keyword, and then from there we need to pass on the parentheses, and we need to hold the condition inside these parentheses, and definitely after that, let me just implement this in a multi-line comment, since I will need, of course, to bring it down. After that, we need definitely to apply now the curly braces, where we can now implement the actual body for the if as a conditional statement. And let me terminate this as a multi-line comment, because we understand how we can work with multi-line comments. So this is the actual syntax for an if statement. And in definition, we can define an if conditional statement as simply the statement that executes if the condition is equal to true. It only executes if the condition which is in between the parentheses, if the condition is equal to true. So for example, we can say, okay, let's create a variable for we to see how we can implement an if conditional statement. So let's create a variable. I'll create a variable and say math, and I will give it a value, of course, let's say 67. I even terminate that process. So definitely what I'm doing is, of course, I'm inserting a value which is based on a data type called int or integer into math as simply a variable in PHP. So what I'm saying is now, okay, I want only the condition that I will place in the body of an if statement to execute once the condition is equal to true. So what I will do is, okay, if the condition, meaning if the variable which I am implementing now, which is math, let me just copy for I not to be, of course, writing this, and then I will say, okay, if math is greater than 50, then definitely let this condition execute, meaning echo the content you have passed. So definitely, so if only and only if the data that is inside math is greater than 50, then definitely the current thing in echo as simply a statement that allows us to output something or to print out something on our browser. That's when it should execute. That's when we should see the statement you have passed. If the value in mathematics is less than 50, then no need to see this. Why? Because definitely it is less than 50. The condition is evaluating to false. So an if conditional statement only evaluates if the value inside the condition evaluates to true. If math is greater than 50, meaning we are implementing now an operator which is called a conditional operator, greater than, from our previous session, I'm sure you understand, from those conditional operators we displayed, we are implementing a conditional operator. Some types of conditional operator are, of course, less than, of course, equal to, and anything related to that, but now we are just using the conditional operator which is greater than. So let's go on our browser, we see if this will execute. Definitely my file is on autosave, hence no need to Ctrl S, unless if it is not on autosave, that is your file definitely, then Ctrl S to save. And if you want to reach at this point where you've already of course integrated the IDE with the browser and also with the local server which we've installed, XAMPP server, please check the description. There is a video that will bring you to this stage where you can just start implementing the code. So we are saying, okay, we've implemented an if conditional statement which only evaluates if the condition is equal to true. If false, then it will not evaluate. So definitely the data inside math is greater than 50. So we should see the condition or the echo statement should evaluate to true. You have passed. So this is what and how if conditional statement actually works. For example, if we are now to put a value 17 which is less than, of course, 50, then we should see nothing. Nothing will be printed out. Why? Because the condition has evaluated to false. Conditional statements, in definition, in general, we can define them as simply statements that perform different actions based on different conditions. So an if statement will always execute if the condition evaluates to true. But what if we want also something to be printed out even if the condition has evaluated to false? That's where we now bring in an if else conditional statement. So an if else conditional statement, the else part of the conditional statement will evaluate if the value in the condition has evaluated to false. So meaning we can extend our if conditional statement to an if else conditional statement by following the syntax else do this, meaning echo, which is print out, you have failed. So definitely the else part of this if else conditional statement will evaluate and will only execute if the condition in the if statement, the very first statement on top there in the parentheses, has evaluated to false. So since of course math is containing 17 which is less than 50, then definitely this shouldn't be executed, because this will only be executed if this condition evaluates to true. But if this won't be executed, then definitely we should see this being executed, the value on the else part. I'm sure you can even tell the use of words. If that doesn't work out, else do this. So definitely if we refresh our browser now, we can say, okay, you have failed. Why? Because the value or the mark that he or she got in mathematics is less than a 50. Again, if we go back and put here, let's say 54, definitely the else part won't execute, because the else part only executes if the condition evaluates to false. So since the condition will evaluate to true, then definitely only the if part of the if else will execute, because this person has passed. I mean 54 is greater than 50, so yes, definitely you have passed. And that is how the if and if else conditional statement actually works. But now let's look at a more complicated type of an if and else statement actually works. So what we'll look at now is simply the extension of an if else conditional statement. We will look at what is called an if else if conditional statement. How do we now implement an if, else if, and else conditional statement? And by definition, how can we define it? Well, in definition, we can define this conditional statement as simply an appropriate way of passing out or evaluating a condition that will have multiple decisions. For example, instead of just printing out, hey, you have passed, hey, you have failed, let's print out the very appropriate information which will allow us now to see the equivalency of the actual passing. For example, if we say, if an individual had 100, let's now be printing out, oh, you had 100, then you, hey, definitely you had an A. Oh, you had an A, you had a 60, definitely you had a B. Hey, you had a 40, then definitely you had a C. Hey, your marks are below 40, hence you have a D, you failed. So let's do that. Let's try to now pass in multiple decisions for we to see how an if, else, if and else conditional statement actually does. So since an if, else if and else conditional statement is simply an extension of an if else statement, then it follows the same syntax like the syntax for an if statement. Definitely at the start we implement an if conditional statement, as we'll say if, definitely the parenthesis, now we pass in the actual condition which should be evaluated. This condition will look more difficult because it will contain operators that we learned from our previous sessions. If you don't understand how operators work, please double check the video from our previous session. So we'll say, okay, if the variable which is math is less than or equal to 100, meaning it can either be 100 or less than. If the content in math is less than or equal to 100, at the same time, let's give it a scoop by using the AND as the logical operators from our previous session, and the current, of course, content in math variable, if it is greater than and equal to 80, then definitely if this evaluates to true, then echo out, hey, you have an A. So definitely this should be printed out if this condition evaluates to true. And that's what an if statement actually does. It is only executed if the condition at the condition of its parenthesis is equal to true. We have a clear summary as we will be done with this for we to understand what an if, else if and else statement actually does. So that has been implemented. Now what if the marks are below 80? What should we do? What if the marks are in between 60 and 80? Well, definitely we'll bring in now another condition which is called an else if condition, and here we again pass in the parenthesis, and again we'll say, okay, let me just copy this variable, Ctrl C, and then we'll just say, okay, if this variable, the content in the variable is less than, of course, 80, at the same time let's give it a scoop, okay, and the content in the math variable is at the same time greater than or equal to 60, then we should have this body being executed where I'll say echo, hey, you have a B. So definitely this condition will be executed. Hey, you have a B. Why? Because it means this has evaluated to true. Else, if, and else, including the if conditional statements, evaluates multiple decisions, and this is why we are saying it is an extension of an if condition, not just an if condition, but if, else, if, and else is also an extension of an if else as a conditional statement. So what we are again saying is, what if the value that the individual person scored is in between 60 and 40? What should we then print out? Definitely we'll again stick to the else if. Else if, again, the parenthesis, if the marks in the math variable are less than 60, and we give it, of course, a scoop, and again the value inside that is greater than or equal to 40, then definitely let's print out saying, okay, since the marks are in between 60 and 40, then definitely echo the statement, hey, you have a C. So meaning a C should be printed out because the marks, they are not above 60. They are in between 40 and 60. But what happens again if the marks, they are below 40? I mean, that's failing now. So we'll use now an else as a conditional statement, because we said an else as a conditional statement will evaluate if all the condition evaluates to false. So meaning, if the if statement evaluates to false, we'll double check, is the else if condition evaluating also to false? If yes, it is evaluating to false, then we'll also double check, is the else if as the third condition also evaluating to false? If it is evaluating to false, then no option. We need to now execute the condition inside the else as a conditional statement saying, hey, you have just failed. So meaning this last statement will be executed if the marks are in between 100 and 80, you have an A. If the marks, they are in between 80 and 60, you have a B. If the marks, they are in between 60 and 40, you have a C. Else if they are below 40, you have failed. Definitely, let's go back on our browser, which is Google Chrome. We see my document is on AutoSell, so no need to Control S. We see if definitely this will be printed out, and definitely we can see, okay, we have the previous workings that we were doing. Okay, so let's refresh. You have a C. Why is this individual having a C? Well, because the content in mark as a variable is 54, and 54 is definitely in between 40 and 60. If you don't understand these less than signs, please double check the previous session where we explained that we also have comparison operators and logical operators, which is an AND. We use those ampersands as signs to denote for the AND. But what if the marks are, of course, let's say, what if this individual has a 90? Let's refresh, we see what answer we'll get. You have an A. Why? Because 90 is in between 80 and 100. But what if the marks are in between 60 and 80? Okay, let's give this person a 70. Then definitely when you refresh, we'll see you have a B. But what if this person has completely failed? He has a 13%. Then definitely, hey, you have just failed. I mean, we can't do anything. You have failed. We can't even compensate a 13%. Neither can we even ask for a redemption. So this is what we can do with conditional statements. They evaluate multiple decisions. Since this is more like a longer video, let's try to have a summary of what we have discussed so far. So far in this session, we've discussed that there are at least for now 3 types of conditional statements which remain on the same section, of which the first one is an if conditional statement, the if else conditional statement, and the if else if and the else as a conditional statement. These conditional statements, they are in the same section. If else is an extension of an if conditional statement. If else if and else is simply an extension of an if else conditional statement. I'm sure you can also tell from the actual condition that we implemented last. It contains the if as the very first conditional statement, and the else, meaning if else, as the conditional statement, and in between we've also implemented, of course, the else if and else if as one of the last conditional statements that we've talked about in this session. So what we are saying is, of course, in the first execution, this will only be executed if the condition evaluates to true. If math is less than or equal to 100, and at the same time math is greater than or equal to 80, we are giving it a scope in between 80 and 100, then evaluate to this. At the second time, we are saying, okay, let this be executed only if this condition is equal to true. If math is definitely less than 80, but again, it shouldn't be less than 60, meaning it should be greater than or equal to 60. We are giving it a scope in between 80 and 60. Then evaluate to this if only this is equal to true. Again, we are using the else if statement, saying, okay, if this condition evaluates to true where math is in between 40 and 60, then definitely print out, hey, you have a C. Otherwise, if all these conditions evaluate to false, then no option will go with the else as a conditional statement, where we'll say, hey, you have just failed because we failed to analyze your marks either being in between 40 or 100. Hence, they are below 40 and you have just failed. So friends, this is the actual information we can actually present. If you don't understand, please rewatch the video, double check and see how you can understand the conditional statements in PHP, as we will progress on our next session to understand another type of a conditional statement, which is called a switch statement. Please don't forget to subscribe, and you are on CodeNet.